no exception, to that. We had to push this back, and we really appreciate the mayor being flexible and with his time, but then also being willing to do it virtual, being that that's still what we needed to do due to the state of the pandemic that we're in. We do look forward to getting into in-person events, but right now we're just happy to be able to get together with you all virtually. To really kind of kick things off, I wanted to make sure to thank our sponsors. And those sponsors are, the presenting sponsor is TS Prosperity Group. The gold sponsor is Felsberg, Holt, and Ulavig. Frontier Savings Bank, Iowa Western Community College, JEO Consulting Group, Lyman Ritchie, Pinnacle Construction, Smith Peterson Law Firm, and U.S. Bank. And the registration table sponsor is Real Property Management. We thank you all for your support, and we thank you for your flexibility as well, as we've had to obviously adapt this event and change this event, as I mentioned, over the last few months. So we thank you all very much. As far as the format goes for today, before I turn it over to the mayor, who you're all here to hear from, obviously, I just wanted to let you know we're going to first have the mayor provide his remarks. And then after he provides his remarks, we'll have some time for Q&A. So do feel free to be putting your questions into the chat box. That's something that we always want to encourage in these events. So do be putting those in there. We'll be monitoring that as a staff, and we'll make sure we get those questions asked after the mayor has gone through his remarks. I also have some questions prepared for the mayor, but I do want to make sure we hear from our audience. So with that, I do once again thank Mayor Walsh for being with us here today. And Mayor Walsh, the floor is yours for the foreseeable future. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Drew, and welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in. So this is actually the 2020 mayor's address. As Drew said, we canceled because of COVID, and so there's quite a bit about last year and then some updates on the budget. And since I'm a commercial banker numbers guy, there's a lot of numbers in, and we can clarify them at the end if you have questions. But so here's a little bit about what's going on in the city, and my job as the mayor of Council Bluffs. Council Bluffs has an official population of 62,355. Its population growth has been stagnant for the greater part of the last 2 decades. The post-World War baby boom generation has begun to fade away, and their numbers aren't being adequately replaced by new births or new residents to the community. My primary job as mayor is serving as the chief administrative officer of the City of Council Bluffs. The Council Bluffs City Council approves city ordinances and resolutions which provide direct operations guidance to my office and to the employees whom I oversee. I must supervise the various city departments in accordance with the rules that have been established by the City Council. I perform my job with a significant amount of help from the leadership teams of 12 different city departments. Each department performs its own unique set of functional responsibilities. In total, Council Bluffs has 483 full-time employees. And at various times of the year, we also employ about an additional 100 seasonal employees. 381 of those 483 full-time employees jobs are concentrated within 3 departments. The police department employs 140. The Public Works Department, which maintains our streets and sewer systems, has 134 employees. And there are 107 employees in the fire department. The 4th largest city department is the Parks Department, where most of those seasonal employees work during summertime in recreation and parks maintenance. Most typical private sector businesses achieve success when they concentrate on their core competencies. Their efforts concentrate on doing 1 or 2 things extremely well. Upper management works to maximize efficiency within their sales and administrative efforts, and they work to reduce production and inventory cost factors, and they appropriately price their products so that they provide recognized value to their customers within their target market. Their business strategy is designed to motivate buyers who will purchase and then repurchase their products and produce a net profit for distribution among the equity owners of the business. City government operates much differently. It performs multiple functions on behalf of all the citizens that it serves. Most often, the city's customers aren't allowed to take part in any of the purchasing decisions. Instead, they are required by residency to financially participate. American government operations are extremely close to being a true socialist organization because the theory behind successful local government is that the operation, production, and distribution functions are financed and administered in an effort to benefit the community as a whole. I regularly work with subject matter experts who are employed by the city within multiple unrelated business functions, which are designed to benefit the variety of community needs. The city employs mechanics, horticulturalists, attorneys, building maintenance workers, finance professionals, public safety personnel, healthcare professionals, civil engineers, building construction experts, heavy equipment operators, truck drivers, accountants, communications experts, recreation administrators, park maintenance workers, chemists, safety inspectors, sanitarians, information technologists, concrete finishers, refuge and recycling professionals, community planners, librarians, administrative support staff, and the human resources department who helps to hire them. In addition to the functional responsibilities of city government, the functional responsibilities of city government are to provide public safety, to install and maintain community infrastructure, which are our streets and our sanitary sewer networks. It's our responsibility to organize development that is strategically planned and efficiently implemented. The city ensures that structural integrity of the newly constructed horizontal and vertical infrastructure, and it ensures citizen safety through regularly scheduled fire inspections of all commercial property. It also verifies compliance with minimum code standards through regular landlord inspections to ensure that residential tenants have safe, affordable rental property. It provides residents with a variety of passive and active recreational opportunities. And the city had the vision to imagine a free Wi-Fi network that could be used to help educate our children. And we partnered together with the Council Bluffs School District and several benevolent community funders to successfully implement that vision, which had unanticipated benefit for our students during the pandemic. And we do much, much more. Each year, with the help of my department heads, I prepare an annual budget that must be filed with the county auditor by March 31st. The budget timeframe covers the upcoming fiscal year, which runs from July 1st through June 30th. Expenditures in each year's city budget in this year's city budget will exceed 177 million. Said another way, I administer monthly spending that on average is almost 15 million per month. I also develop a capital improvement plan. Both the budget and the capital improvement plan must be submitted to the city council for their approval. Presented as an executive summary, city revenues are primarily spent on capital improvements to city property, city personnel costs, equipment purchases, and utilities expenses, listed herein in descending order from largest expenditure to least. The largest area of expenditure starts with public safety expense, which encompasses 25.5% of the city's entire budget. And in dollars spent, the amount exceeds 39.75 million. Public safety includes police, fire, and animal control. Expenditures on capital projects is the second largest area of expenditure, equating to 24.7% of this year's budget, with 38.9 million in expenditure. Government administrative costs are 16.8 million, or 10.7% of the budget. These costs include coverage for finance, city legal, the city clerk, building inspectors, and human services or human resources. Cultural and recreational expenditures account for 8% of the budget, or approximately $12.5 million. This functional area includes parks and recreation, the Mid-America Center, and the library. Public works, streets, and storm maintenance is 7.3% of the budget, and they will spend $11.5 million. I don't think people realize that no property taxes are spent on streets and sewers. The department is funded exclusively by road use tax and a sanitary sewer fee. This is the road use tax is the tax that consumers pay at the gas pump, and it pays the public works employees' wages, benefits, their equipment purchases, and their construction materials. $10.5 million annually services the city's outstanding debt obligations. And throughout Iowa, Council Bluffs has the second lowest percent of debt utilization at 21.1% of its general obligation bond capacity. Iowa's other 10 largest communities average 45.3% of their authorized bond capacity, with Sioux City and Des Moines exceeding 60% of theirs, and Iowa City being the lowest in the state at 17.4%. But they rely heavily on revenue bonds for services they provide to the University of Iowa. Community and economic development is estimated to cost Council Bluffs taxpayers $7.7 million in fiscal year 22, which equates to 4.9% of the city's annual budget. And intergovernmental appropriations for health and social services, funding from a variety of HUD programs, make up the remainder, 2/10 of this year's budget. In Council Bluffs School District, 40.5% of your annual property tax payment goes to city government. If you live in Lewis Central School District, 45.2% of your taxes go to the city. The city's tax levy is the same in both Lewis Central and Council Bluffs school districts, but Lewis Central Community School District's tax asking is lower than is in Council Bluffs Community School District, because Lewis Central School District has a much higher average taxable valuation. On the revenue side of the budget statement, people are surprised to learn that only about 36.7% or $49 million of the city's revenue comes from the collection of property taxes. Another $26 million or 18% of the budget comes from intergovernmental funding, which is state and federal revenue appropriations. Other city taxes besides property tax account for 16% of the city's total projected revenues, or $23 million. These taxes include $10.5 million of local option sales tax revenue. Charges for fees and services are $8.2 million, and they provide 15% of the city's general fund revenue. These are payments for city goods and services that not every citizen uses on a regular basis. So rather than the entire citizenry paying the cost is paid for by the purchaser when that particular service or item is used. For example, renting sports fields, purchasing a building permit, closing streets for a special event. Utility and franchise fee revenue totals $4.8 million. Utility and property tax replacement, or the reallocation of property taxes paid by large utility providers, are $3.3 million. About 10 years ago, Council Bluffs would get all the property taxes for Mid-America Energy, and the legislature went in and said that they would like to pro-rata distribute that amongst the service areas of the large utilities. And so that number has shrunk for Council Bluffs, but it's still 3.3 million. Hotel and motel tax revenue has been disrupted in the last two successive years by natural disasters, 2019's flood and 2020's pandemic, but we are hopeful for some significant recovery this year. But we are conservatively projecting scaled down revenue of $2.4 million. Gaming tax, which once again was a victim of COVID, shutdowns and capacity restrictions, likely will contribute slightly more than $2 million. There are about 6 other smaller sources of revenue that make up the remaining 13% of the city budget. I have additional oversight responsibility for 2 side businesses that the city operates, which are the city's garbage collection and recycling program and the installation and repair of the city's sanitary sewer system. I just think it's an engineering marvel if you think about the fact that every business and resident in Council Bluffs is connected to an underground network of sanitary sewer that ends up down by the Mid-America Energy Power Plant. It's just staggering to me that it's just a spider web of network. I think people are sometimes surprised to learn that neither of these 2 functions are part of the regular basic package of city services. Not every citizen receives benefit of these services, so they're individually billed. Garbage is only collected from residential properties with less than 4 families. Multifamily residences and commercial properties must contract their own waste disposal with a private services provider. Regarding sanitary sewers, some properties in the community don't use the city's sanitary sewer system because they have septic systems and therefore they aren't billed for sewer usage. And this is why you receive a separate garbage bill and a separate sewer bill. The sewer bill is incorporated in your regular Council Bluffs Waterworks bill under the premise that fresh water coming into your home results in wastewater exiting it. Adjustments are made to factor out the water that's used to water your lawn in the summertime. The calculations are only done in the wintertime when people aren't watering their lawns. I also oversee the management contracts for Dodge Park Golf Course, which generates about $1.2 million in revenue, and the Mid-America Center, which generates about $4 million in revenue. As of just 2 years ago, the golf course has now become profitable. On the other hand, the Mid-America Center is almost 20 years old, and today's annual capital expenditure for equipment replacement and facilities maintenance outpaces the revenue that the complex currently brings in, most especially during this current environment of pandemic. I help to review all civil damage claims and workman's compensation claims that have been filed against the city. While this sounds like quick work, it's a surprising number of claims to go through. Currently, there are 15 active civil claims against the city. Many are small in nature. 5 of them are snow removal related incidences involving knocked over mailboxes or damaged parked vehicles. There are a couple regarding vehicular damage from potholes, and there are always a few trip and fall on city property occurrences. But several involve significant civil damage claims that likely will at some time be litigated in court. Currently, the city has 38 active workman's compensation claims that so far have accounted for total benefits payments in excess of $7.5 million. 31 of those active claims involve police and fire personnel. Firemen lift heavy objects and heavy people. They work in wet, dark, cramped spaces. Police chase bad guys at high speeds in their cars and on foot. These jobs can be as dangerous as they are exciting. 21 of the current 31 police and fire claims are now more than a decade old. The date of loss of the city's oldest active workman's compensation claim is 1984. Medical care for related injuries isn't covered by an employee's health insurance. City taxpayers must pay for the medical treatment in the employee's lost earning capacity. Police and fire personnel are commonly referred to as 411 employees because the rules pertaining to their employment can be found in Chapter 411 of the Iowa Code. Iowa law presumes that 411 employees, by the nature of the work that they perform, can and will acquire certain illness through exposures to smoke or contagious pathogens. If a 411 employee is diagnosed with heart disease, lung disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, or one of 7 specific types of cancer, under Iowa law, they are automatically presumed that their disease came from their job exposure. To some degree, this presumption is reasonable because public safety personnel responding to a fire could actually sustain lung or heart damage through smoke inhalation, or they might contract certain forms of cancers after exposure to various chemicals that might be stored in a commercial warehouse where the heat of a fire has condensed that chemical into a vaporized substance that could be ingested or inhaled, thus resulting in a very valid workman's compensation event. Legislation in Iowa's Chapter 411 does not differentiate between police personnel and fire personnel, and one code covers both public safety jobs. Whether these presumed diseases are employment related, or as with many citizens, where disease results from non-job factors like hereditary predispositions or standard poor health practices, the city continues to be liable for ongoing medical expense until the disease is arrested or until the employee dies. Cancers can go into remission, but heart and lung disease, for the most part, can only be treated and never cured. This year, the Iowa legislature is proposing allowing 411 employees who have contracted one of the presumed diseases years after their retirement to file a claim against the city where they once had worked, even though they were healthy when they retired. This expanded practice could greatly increase taxpayers' financial obligation. Remember, performing the day-to-day business management responsibilities of the city is about only 2/3 of my job responsibilities. I am the primary reference source in Council Bluffs that answers all variety of citizen questions. I look up phone numbers, I contact people to appropriate a response to an appropriate response agency. I follow up on complaints, I help families in need. I've even recommended bail bondsmen. I had someone call asking about where could they get a bond, and you know, that could mean a variety of things. And I said, are you talking about a bail bond? And they said, yes. And I said, I get all my bail bonds from Gallagher. One year, I even researched names and addresses for a citizen who wanted to mail out Christmas cards to her neighbor. I also am the public relations voice of the city. I serve in a variety of civic capacities. I make public service announcements, do press releases, and I respond to questions from the press. I attend a large variety of other community recognition events, and I participate in community forums. I take part in groundbreaking events for new construction, and I'm there to cut the ribbon when the construction is complete. I also research and write all my own speaking material. Supporting successful economic developments of advanced Southwest Iowa toward new business attraction and current business retention, along with our community development and public works departments. I help to oversee the city's economic development efforts. In just the last 3 years, these efforts have resulted in new capital investment in Council Bluffs that exceeds $234 million and has resulted in almost 500 new jobs. My job involves community outreach and ceremonial responsibilities. I welcome conventions. I regularly speak to just about every area service club, business organization, most sororal and fraternal organizations. I read to elementary students at both Council Bluffs School District and Lewis Central School District. I also speak to older students about local government and the need for citizen engagement and civic responsibilities. I attend multiple school functions, where my message often is to encourage our kids to stay in school so that they can graduate and successfully enter the workforce. I serve on advisory councils and have helped with strategic planning efforts for a multitude of nonprofit organizations, including the Council Bluffs Community Schools. Additionally, almost every nonprofit organization expects that the mayor will attend their fundraising events. There is no budget for promotional or entertainment funding to attend these events, so the price of each ticket comes out of my own pocket. I'm the chief political lobbyist for the city on both state and national legislative issues. One well-intentioned misstep by our state or federal legislative bodies can overnight have a dramatic impact on how the city must conduct their business. For the last 9 years, I've served on the board of the Iowa League of Cities. The Iowa League of Cities represents Iowa's 940 cities and provides many services like educational opportunities, consultation services on best business practices, legal interpretation, lobbying efforts, and much, much more. I was the league president in 2016, and for the last 4 years, I've served as the organization's immediate past president and then past president. Past presidents need to remain in elected office, and my term has been extended multiple years due to individuals either not being reelected to office or due to their retirement. My term on the board actually ended last fall, but I immediately was recruited to form a statewide mayors alliance, whose membership is made up of over 100 Iowa mayors. Yesterday, the mayor of Coralville and I began curriculum planning for an orientation training program to educate newly elected Iowa mayors that will begin after this fall's election. Council Bluffs City Charter defines a strong mayor form of government. A municipal charter is the basic document that defines the organization, powers, functions, and essential procedures of city government. It is comparable to the Constitution of the United States or a state's constitution. The charter is the most important legal document of any city. In the state of Iowa, there are only 2 large communities that have a strong mayor form of government. Those communities are Council Bluffs and Waterloo. Additionally, Omaha has a strong mayor form of government. The person in charge of all these areas of responsibility is somebody that has been chosen by a popular vote of the citizens. Iowa has no recall feature for its elected officials. If a mayor is physically, mentally, or intellectually unable to discharge the duties of the office of mayor, then the city is at the mercy of an inadequate administrator until the date of the next election. The city could become irreparably damaged by mismanagement before it has the ability to take corrective action. All other large cities in Iowa have a city manager form of government where a professionally trained city management under the direction of the city council oversees the day-to-day administrative responsibilities of their city. In the city manager form of government, elected mayors are solely responsible for the ceremonial aspects of the job. The advantage of city manager form of government is that an incompetent city manager can be terminated and replaced by the city council. For me, this differentiation is legitimate reason to reevaluate our strong mayor form of government. The brilliant American philosopher Mike Tyson famously said, "Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face." Council Bluffs has suffered through 2 consecutive years of natural disaster. Obviously, COVID has dominated our focus in these last 13 months. And in fact, COVID has been the topic of discussion for so long that many people have forgotten that just prior to COVID's arrival, Council Bluffs had spent 12 months dealing with Missouri River flooding. In a single fiscal year 20, we had back-to-back natural disasters, flooding in the fall and COVID in the spring. Today, we are still in the process of producing work related to 2019 8-month-long flood event. I think many people don't quite understand that why Council Bluffs didn't experience above ground flooding. The extended height and time frame of the Missouri River as it remained outside its banks resulted in a summer and fall of elevated groundwater levels that have caused infrastructure damage to city property, and in many cases caused significant property damage to people's foundations and their interior basements. We continue to file FEMA claims for repairs to flood damaged city property. We have rebuilt or replaced multiple emergency sewer collapses in the northwest area of town, which so far total in excess of $11 million of expenditure. When the river levels are high, then the city must close the gates at stormwater release locations that normally allow our excess stormwater to gravity flow from the city to the Missouri River. When river levels are high, these gates must be closed to protect the city from river water backflow coming into the city. When the gates are closed and it rains, stormwater is retained in the low areas of western edge of Council Bluffs, and isolated property damage is often the result. We currently are working on strategies to mitigate these problems. The hope is to construct a large detention basin that can efficiently store excess stormwater runoff until it can be efficiently pumped up and over the city's levee system. We continue to work with FEMA and HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to secure financial relief funding that would allow us to purchase multiple damaged residential homes and that are impacted by flood damage to their foundations, and in some cases have resulted in compromised structural stability. Then sometime around April 1st, 2020, Council Bluffs had its first confirmed COVID case. Many local elected officials gathered together at the Emergency Management Agency office to alert citizens that the pandemic had arrived in Pottawatomie County. At that time, citizens who tested positive for COVID were treated like pariahs by their friends and their neighbors. Some actually received personal threats. During the first press conference, I leaned over to County Supervisor Justin Schultz and I told him, in 2 or 3 weeks, this won't even be newsworthy. He looked confused and asked me why, and I told him that there will be hundreds of confirmed COVID cases. That number turned out to be thousands of COVID cases. And COVID became Iowa's third leading cause of death in 2020. To date, we've had 150 COVID-related deaths in Pottawatomie County, over 5,450 more in Iowa, and a staggering 530,000 deaths in the United States. The good news is that the number of cases and hospitalizations and deaths is on a declining trend. Ashley Cruz is the city's communication officer, and she has worked closely with Pottawatomie County Public Health Director Matt Walsh on their press releases throughout the pandemic. With the help of Ashley's video production skills, I have researched, written, and recorded over 100 minutes of the mayor videos on various COVID-related topics. Often our daily topic of discussion has been days ahead of network news reports. After a slow start, efforts to administer the COVID vaccine are now going quite well. Pottawatomie County Public Health has vaccinated over 20,000 residents, including frontline healthcare workers, EMT, ambulance personnel, residents and employees of long-term care facilities, individuals that are over 65, and anyone with significant health conditions, teachers and staff, and individuals living in congregational group settings, police officers, and food manufacturing workers. Matt Walsh and his staff at Pottawatomie County Public Health have worked tirelessly, and they certainly deserve our accolades. To date, that in there twice, so I won't tell you again the number of COVID deaths. Another atypical responsibility of my office last year was to work with the Census Bureau to help them effectively administer a local census taking process. Every 10 years, the federal government conducts a population census count, with 2020 being the most recent census year. And of course, it was also the year of the COVID pandemic. The intent behind the census taking is to ensure accurate numbers of elected officials in the House of Representatives. States gain or lose seats in Congress and in the Electoral College, depending on how much their population changes relative to the nation in whole. Additionally, the allocation of $1.5 trillion annually in federal funds hinges on census data, including funding for state and local governments, as well as funding for nonprofits who deliver much needed services to individuals within our communities. Last fall's mail-in response to requests for census information in Council Bluffs actually was above the mail response rate in 2010. But the follow-up phase, where census workers go door to door to ask questions of non-responsive households, was slow to initiate and actually ended weeks earlier than had previously been planned. Numerous knowledgeable groups believe that this abbreviated process does not equate to collecting accurate, high-quality data or instill confidence that the census data is even actually acceptably accurate. The bottom line is that the federal government will be left to make some inexact guesstimate assumptions, which may or may not be advantageous to Council Bluffs over the next 10 years. I believe there is legitimate reason for concern. Frankly, this is a job with lots and lots of exhausting work. Today, government officials are on the front line of social media blitzes, where anyone can pretend to be a subject matter expert. People have become overly aggressive and mean in their social media narrative. Inhospitable social interactions then bleed over into emails and personal phone calls from people who have decided that they need to take out whatever personal frustration they might currently have on their elected officials because we work for them. Last week, while writing this narrative, I took a minute to check the city's Facebook to review some feedback from citizens on the recently public release of our riverfront improvements, a project that's being 100% funded by charitable donations. A couple of negative posters were involved in a back and forth exchange where they were discussing the fact that I was up for re-election this fall. They agreed that they needed to find and elect a different mayor who actually understood what it's like to work hard. I just hung my head. I felt a little sorry for myself for about a heartbeat. But then I went back to work. I have too much left to do with so little time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate the information that you shared with us all today. And as I think we can all see and we all heard in your remarks, there's a lot of different things that the city is responsible for. And I'm really glad that you kind of went through item by item and really helped people understand what the city is and isn't involved with, and then also the different funds and things along those lines, because that's a really important distinction to make that some people may not know. So I do appreciate you doing that. But I also want to take some time really quick as people can put their questions in the chat box to thank you. And then I saw Chad Hannon was also on here from the city council, and I also saw several of our county supervisors were on. So I do want to thank all of you for the efforts that you put in, especially this last year. I think you spoke to it pretty clearly, but it's been a really challenging year to go from the flooding to COVID to, how we're going to transition on the back end of that is not easy for any of us. And you guys have done a very good job. And I thank you for your efforts and all the time that you have put into on that.
Thank you.
I'll actually ask, go ahead, sorry.
No, I just saying thank you.
Okay. I also wanted to just, I'll ask the first question, just so as I mentioned before too, people can insert any questions they have in the chat box for the mayor. But the first question I really wanted to ask is, we are in the middle of the legislative session, as you noted, and whether it's the state legislature or the U.S. Congress that's passing any piece of legislation, there can be positive or negative impacts and implications as a result. You touched on a few pieces of policy, but one obviously one we've talked about that just came out this week was one that would get rid of the backfill. Can you talk maybe about some of the bills that you're really watching at the state legislature and what implications they can have for the city?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about the one with 411 workman's compensation. That's an interesting one because in addition to if you're a workman's comp casualty, it is not insurable by the employee's insurance. If the employee contributes to the insurance, it can't be used towards a workman's compensation claim. So that actually comes directly out of the city's budget. And so there is a bill that would propose that people who have retired who come down with a heart, lung, PTSD, or one of those presumed cancers multiple years after their retirement could come back against the city. And the interesting thing, and maybe that has some legitimacy, but the interesting thing is then they go on disability wages. They're on retirement wages, which disability and retirement are comparable, but disability wages are not taxable. And so that creates an interesting situation. You can effectively raise your take-home income by the tax rate if you go back on disability. So I mentioned the guy in 1984. He's a heart disease individual who's still alive, well in his 80s, and continues to have all his medical expense paid by the taxpayers of the City of Council Bluffs. We're looking at the backfill you talked about. Iowa's got really poorly written property tax law that has caused a ton of problems, and frankly, legislators are worried about rewriting the law because they're so concerned that they will be accused of increasing people's property taxes. And so they continue to take a broken property tax law and add new twists and turns to it and further break it. Back in 1978, the Iowa legislature was approached by Farm Bureau, and in those days, farm ground had some real value as investment property, but didn't have the same value as farm ground. And they used to be taxed at the property's value. And so Farm Bureau said, that's not fair. And the legislature started taxing them at what's called a productivity rate. How much money does an acre of ground produce? And that's how they're taxed. Well, then the urban legislator said, wait a minute, you're going to shift all the property tax liability to the City of Council Bluffs, or not the City of Council Bluffs, to the urban areas throughout the state. And so they tied those two together and they move in tandem. They never included commercial property tax. And so as from 1978 until 2005, every year, the rollback on residential and agricultural went further back. It started at 100%. It got as low as about 42%. So on a $100,000 home, you only paid taxes on the first 42,000 of it. As we lost that tax valuation, we increased the levy to try and stay up with it. Commercial property wasn't ever included. And so every year it increased 100% of whatever the increased levy was. And at some point in time, it was about 212% of what it was in Omaha. So you could build an identical building in Council Bluffs and Omaha, and you would pay 212% more taxes in Council Bluffs than you'd pay in Omaha. And so the legislature, rather than fixing the problem, bastardized it a little more and said, well, we'll roll it back 10%. but we promise cities will reimburse them, will backfill their lost tax revenue. Well, that lasted until the next election because new people got elected and said, I never made that promise, but we've been able to hold them off since 2013, but there's a new bill introduced yesterday that would just do that same thing, a 5-year phase out of the commercial tax revenue that was promised to cities and counties by the state legislature. And I just don't understand why they need to do that at this time, because their coffers are plentiful. And but we fight that battle every year. They question TIF, which is the only economic development tool we have to recruit new business into town. We fight that battle every year. There's always some proposed change to TIF. Red light cameras is an ongoing issue. While that produces a little revenue, I would tell you that the revenue it produces has gone. When we installed them, we only put them in our most dangerous intersections. And we did it for public safety. People argue, oh, you did it for the revenue. We've never added additional cameras after the initial installation, which took a couple years. And that revenue has gone from 2.6 million to about 600,000, which I think indicates that the cameras have changed people's driving habits and they're effective. And we've never said, hey, we've lost 2 million in revenue from the traffic control devices, so we better put some more around town. That never was our intent.
Thanks, Mayor. As you noted, there's a lot of different things happening at the legislature right now, and right now is really kind of a popular time with a lot of different bills coming out as we look towards the second legislative funnel at the end of next week. You referenced the River's Edge project when you were speaking as well. For those of us who may not be aware of it, if there's some people on the call who haven't necessarily seen the specifics or know a lot about the specifics, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because it's a really exciting project.
So about 3 years ago, with the help of the Heritage Foundation, which is a group of the elite wealthy people in Omaha, Gene Stothert and I co-chaired a committee to reinvigorate the riverfront. You can see the work being done on the Omaha side. It was going to be a joint project between the two communities. It started out as a second pedestrian bridge that would allow people to bike over and do a loop and would get some development along the route. Then it got turned over to the subcommittee that Gene and I headed up, but actually the chair, we were the honorary chairs. The actual chairs were Ken Stinson from Kiewit and Mullins Bay from Valmont. And everything went really good for a year. We had some really significant plans. And Omaha's estimated cost was $280 million. They're going to redo their park. We went down to Dallas and checked out their amazing park, and we went to Oklahoma City, which has an amazing park. The new park invigorates condominium development and multifamily development, increases downtown property tax base. And so their estimated $280 million project went out for bid and came back about $320 million. And so guess who got shorted the difference? Council Bluffs on that side. So Pete Tulipana has done an amazing job of raising money. And phase one, and there will be future phases announced, was made public about 2 weeks ago, and it will be a treetop walk that branches off of the Bob Carey Bridge. It will be able to be shut down so that it can be secured at night, but the treetop walk includes a climbing wall, what's called a roller glide, which is like a zip line, but has more of a roller coaster effect to it. You get in a device and gravity pulls you up and down and around and loops through the trees. I think there'll be an art feature announced at some point that hasn't been announced yet, that will be really neat and can be secured at night. So just a neat project that we think will drive people to the riverfront. It definitely was a consideration in the apartment high-rise that's been proposed at the riverfront. So we think it'll do its job. It's going to be a great amenity for the entire metropolitan area.
Thanks, Mayor. And we touched on some things that have been challenging throughout the past year, but what would you say has been your biggest success in the last year?
Oh God, reaching 65. I don't, it's just, sorry, it's not, hasn't been the success in the last year that we had in the first 4 years. Or first 6 years, we were really knocking out things that were amazing. Blank's just one of those ideas. When I took office, Google had made annual contributions to the city to use however they wanted to for technology. And I was on the council at the time, and we used them initially to install free Wi-Fi in Bayless Park. It never worked. Then we installed free Wi-Fi in the Hunter Block. It never worked. And we installed free Wi-Fi at Hanfin Park, where it never worked. We just didn't have the staff with the expertise to make it work. And so they came to me my first year and said, we've got your annual contribution. What do you want to do? And so we sat down and said we need to be more strategic about how we spend that. We got together with the Council Bluffs School District because we knew there were students that didn't have access to internet because, frankly, Council Bluffs socially and economically is an extremely poor community. About 47% of our population is on poverty and is considered impoverished. And so I've got a really good IT guy, and Council Bluffs School District has a really good IT guy, Pete Tulipana and the Lakin Foundation, at one point Kiewit and Google, and those people helped put it together. No taxpayer dollars were spent on it, and now about 70%, I think, of the city's population has access to free Wi-Fi. It'll get a little more difficult in the hills because it really is a radio wave type installation. But fortunately, some of the homes in the hills are people that can afford internet. So we just had that in place with just a couple phases left to do when COVID hit. The Council Bluffs Schools took some of their CARES Act funding and put that forward to help students in the last couple of school districts get access to Wi-Fi, and I think that was probably a great benefit to their students. So really, that's huger than I think what people realize. But we've done a lot of exciting things. There just isn't a lot of money to go around. I tell people when they ask, we're pretty much the same size as Iowa City. So we need the same amount of police, we need the same amount of firemen, we need the same amount of public works employees. But if you go on Zillow, the average valuation in Iowa City is $275,000. If you go on Zillow, the average valuation in Council Bluffs is 120. And so they're almost 2.5 times of what we are. And so in theory, you could charge 40% of the tax levy in Iowa City that you need to run the city of Council Bluffs. Of course, they don't do that, but they are able to tax less than we are and provide amenities that we struggle to provide. And so we're always cognizant of the fact that taxes are a burden. The other thing I tell people though, and with the tax levy that the council approved the other night, it's $940 a year for city property taxes. Now that doesn't include your county. I know people will, well, my taxes are a lot more than that. Per 100,000, it's $940, the paper said, for your city taxes. You also have county and school district taxes. But when you think of all the city services you get, if you had the average valuation, it's about $100 a month. And look what your cable bill is. Look what your cell phone bill is. We're not way out of line, but people continually say, oh, our taxes are way too high. I would beg to differ.
Thanks, Marin. One thing that's been talked about quite a bit in the last few weeks since it was signed in the law about 13 days ago is the American Rescue Plan, which is the most recent COVID assistance plan that the federal government passed. That was something that the budget had to be kind of tabled for the conversation from the 8th to the 22nd for passage. So can you talk a little bit about the money that's the local government that Council Bluffs is going to get as a result of the American Rescue Plan? And then obviously we've also heard of some of the restrictions, limitations that have been put on that, and just talk how that money can be used, but then also how it may not be able to be used, but just kind of underline how it's helping the city.
So the one thing I heard years ago, and I'll be off a little, and I'm sure Drew knows exactly, so he's going to give me a funny look, but there are 435 legislators and there are 435 government administrative officers. And so the legislature makes a broad bill, and then it gets down to these administrative offices, and they put little requirements and nuances in the bill. And so they announced, because we had lost revenues due to COVID and we had extra expenses due to COVID, we could have lived with a budget that would have kept the tax levy the same. Last year, we had 7% growth in valuation, and I'm sure many of you on this phone call, maybe all of you, if the average growth is 7%, have seen increased valuation in your property. I don't think that the valuation is fairer than fair. I always get that. My valuation is too high. Well, would you sell it for that? Hell no, I wouldn't sell it for that. But people's homes are literally, my neighbor came over the other day and said, I'm moving, enjoyed living next to you. And I said, well, your house, you didn't list your house, did you? And sorry if there's realtors on here. I see Dan for sure. But and he said, why? And I said, yeah, they're jumping off the shelf. And I think we had, and Dan's smiling, we had like 34 houses a few weeks ago for sale in the entire city of Council Bluffs. And so houses are getting multiple offers and going above asking price. And so I think the assessment's fair, but we didn't want to increase people's taxes 7.4%, which is what the average valuation went up. We had heard that there was going to be this American Rescue Plan funding that would reimburse cities for their lost revenues and their increased costs of COVID. We still have not gotten clear guidance. I reached out to the National League of Cities. Like I said, I've been part of the Iowa League of Cities. I went to the National League of Cities and said, here, I'm not, because there's language in there that says states can't lower taxes with the money. So I don't think I'm a state. I think they're talking about the 50 states can't use the money they got to lower their taxes, but that's still open to interpretation. But it says you can use the money to replace lost revenues or incurred expenses. If I do that, I can then lower our tax levy. We haven't got clear guidance yet. I think there are people that got the CARES Act money back in May of last year that still don't have clear guidance. But I would tell you, our numbers are in the neighborhood when you combine lost revenue and additional expenses of about $3.3 million. We got $24.6 million. And the county got another $18 million. And I think the intent, from how I read the bill, is to use that money with local decision-making power to jumpstart the local economy. And so I think we need to be strategic in how we do that. Can we get something that rolls over and creates funding? You know, we again, I said 34 homes for sale. Can we put in infrastructure that will incent residential development? I think we can. I think we will. We're in the midst of a land use study in Council Bluffs. Iowa's got a really bad property annexation law that makes it almost impossible to annex property. Every year you'll see Mayor Jean's father decided to annex these 10 subdivisions. She can do that with just by signing a piece of paper and take those properties in and grow her tax base. Iowa, you can't do that. You have to go to the legislature, go before the annexation committee. They review your application, say, yeah, it looks reasonable. And then you have to go back to a vote of the people of your community. So you have to jump two big hurdles that cost several $100,000 to do. And so it's difficult to do. The bad thing about Nebraska's property tax law for them is that they cannot annex outside their county. So Omaha can annex communities of less than 10,000 people. Once they're over 10,000, they can't take them. So they can't do Papillion, La Vista, and Bellevue. Ralston's got some financial trouble, so they don't want Ralston. But Douglas County is running out of property and they cannot annex outside of Douglas County. So at some point, they're going to run out of ground, and at some point, it's not too far away. And then they're going to come here or Sarpy County. But if we're ready and have the infrastructure in the ground for new development, they're going to come here. Jerry Torzon and MP Dodge helped Jerry, is a recognized developer in the Douglas Sarpy County area. He's the past president of MOBA, which is Metro Omaha Builders Association. He built in Council Bluffs, and he's told me it's his most successful, fast-selling subdivision he's ever done. So we think the future's bright on residential development. It will be interesting, the COVID effects on retail development. We're going to see a lot of vacancies, I think. People always ask me what's the biggest thing I fear. And for years, my answer was the metamorphosis of bricks and mortar retail to internet sales. And the reason is you lose the jobs, you lose the property valuation. If the building sits vacant, the valuation goes down. And Iowa never did a very good job of collecting internet sales tax, and so you lose the sales tax. So it's a three-shot whammy. That conversion was taking place about 1% a year. 1% more each year started shopping on the internet. Since last March, that has seen a 19% growth, so almost 19 years worth of increased internet sales. When brick and mortar opens back up, some of that may snap back the other way, but and then the other thing that's interesting, and I don't think it will be as detrimental to Council Bluffs, but what's going to happen to the commercial real estate market, those large lease arrangements, where a business owns its own building. I don't think that's a big area of concern, but if you're a commercial real estate developer and you're leasing office space, I think you're likely in for a rude awakening. I've got a brother-in-law who's the head of Rockwell International in St. Louis, and he told me last time he was in town, they're going from 40,000 square feet of office space to 8, and they're going to be working at home. So what happens to the business traveler? Does that industry continue to suffer, which for us means a less than robust hotel motel environment. So it will be interesting what the lagging issues related to COVID are.
Thanks, Mayor. And you kind of talked a little bit about something that you're pretty concerned about, but can you talk about something that has you the most excited about as you look forward and you look at, running for re-election? What are some things that you're really going to talk about that you're really excited about in the next 4 years?
Well, I think we're going to, for the bankers on the phone, again, we've seen some significant impacts to food and beverage and to hospitality. But there is a lot of money on the sidelines right now. We had our bank, the city's bank, ask us to move 20 million out of the bank. They don't have any need for it and they got to pay for it. So we shopped it around a couple other banks. They said, we really don't need that. Now, I went to the bank I used to work for and still friends with the owner. I said, you got a lot of excess cash? He said, 280 million just sitting there. So I think once we come out of this and confidence gets back in the economic environment, I think we're going to see some growth. The interesting thing during COVID and in no small part due to the efforts of Paula Hazelwood and her team, we have gotten a lot of projects that have started and many more that are about to happen, hundreds of millions of dollars in commercial development and logistics and warehousing. I think you're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years for sure. And we'd like to get that riverfront high-rise project going. And so really economic developments is looking really bright on the horizon. So actually, and people know I love Wendy Schultz like no other. She was an amazing person who everything that I thought up to do, she did in a year and a half. I had to tell her, you got to slow down. You're killing me. So I miss her. She was an amazing individual. So I don't have any great projects other than to help people come out of this pandemic stronger from it. But the reason I don't have a lot of things yet to do is, by God, Wendy did most of them. So damn her.
Well, thanks, Mayor. I never had an opportunity to work with her, but I've heard nothing but good things about her. So I'm glad that you were able to mention her and the great work that she did.
It was interesting.
You also,
I introduced Matt Martison, who's a replacement. Matt's doing a great job, but to Google, and one of the execs of Google said to Matt, "Ooh, you've got big little shoes to fill." If you knew Wendy, she was very short. So
you referenced the land use plan, and I think that's obviously going to be something that's really important to the developers and just the community in general as we look as to how the city should best look to grow, especially as you talked about with some of the limitations that Douglas County has. Can you speak to that a little bit? We're still waiting for the final draft, but can you speak to that a little bit just so people on the call have a better understanding of that plan?
Well, obviously, if you look around Council Bluffs, there are restrictions based on topography. The hills get steep on one end of town. We're blocked by the river on the other end of town. So really we can grow to the southeast. And even in the southeast, we start hitting some rolling hills. So if you put sewer installation in, you put it below the frost line and everything needs to flow downhill. And so the difficulty is where do you strategically put it so that you have to spend the least amount of money for what's called lift stations? You have to take that sewage and lift it up so that it can go downhill to the next point where you have to lift it up, so that it can go downhill to the next point where you have to lift it up. It gets expensive to develop in the hills. And so the Potawatomi County and the city have jointly gone together on a land use plan to hire engineering firms to take a look at where are the most economical places to incent residential growth in Council Bluffs, and to site locate commercial growth in Council Bluffs so that we can help jumpstart that. You know, it's a little difficult if you go out on Highway 92 and you see a good piece of ground and you want to do dense housing. You can't do it. The lots have to be big enough to include a septic system, and then once they have that septic system, it's tough for the city to go in and convert that over to a sanitary sewer system. It's very expensive. And so, but in those areas where it's just not feasible to do that, we don't want to prohibit or inhibit development on acreage lots and those type of things that could use sanitary septic tanks. And so we just want to know where those areas are and make the best development decisions going forward, because I think we're really in for a boom coming up. So
This is the last question we have. You know, there's a lot of new faces in the community. There's a lot of new leaders, whether it's Brenda Mainwaring at the Iowa West Foundation or President Kinney at Iowa Western Community College. We're going to have a new leader, talking about filling big shoes, at Jenny Edmondson here soon as well. So can you talk a little bit about those new leaders in the community and how you, obviously, as someone who's been involved in city leadership since 1995, what you see your role as you have all these new leaders coming into these key positions?
Well, we all know it's just important to have diversity of opinion. You know, sometimes you're too close to the topic, and it's like when you write something, you read it over and over and over and over again, and at some point you just don't see your mistakes. And so to have a second person go over it, this new leadership group comes from outside the community, from other areas where they've been involved in successful implementation of different programs. I think they can give us new, unique perspective on things we're doing right or wrong, and so that's always a significant benefit to have that second, third, fourth set of eyes on any problem. And it's interesting. You know, I'm probably going to get held for this, but we need to get young people more involved, to be honest with you. When I started in business, I started at the old Council Bluffs Savings Bank, and the president was Eddie Spetman. He brought me in and said, here are the 3 organizations you'll be joining tomorrow, community organizations. And today employees don't seem to stick around as long. And so there really isn't that push from upper management to get active in the community. There are certainly people who are active, and I don't mean to be dismissive of their contributions, but just the knowledge that the future generations have, that people in my generation, I was down at working the vaccine clinic Saturday, and they started telling some lady to do this and that on her computer, and she just started screaming, baby boomer, baby boomer, baby boomer. So, some of us just don't have that skill set, and so we need to really get the next generation involved, and I think Impact Seed B is a good way to do that, because it's going to be their world, and hopefully in some instances they can save it. I told Ashley Cruz the other day, I said, I've never been so discouraged in my life. I'm just scared, and I really am scared. I just see people's attitudes and the hate in people and the bigotry in people, and there really aren't bad people, but for whatever reason, what's been happening in the last 4 or 5 years, I guess people feel comfortable in expressing their hate that I didn't know was there, and it's concerning to me.
Well, thanks, Mayor. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and we appreciate you once again being flexible with your time and with us scheduling this. This is always a really well attended event. I don't know if you saw this. There's about 120 people on at the peak time for a virtual event, which is obviously very, very good. So obviously you're doing some things right. Everyone wanted to touch base and hear what you have going on and what this city has to look forward to. So we appreciate your work. We appreciate your leadership at City Hall, and we really do appreciate your collaboration as well. Another thing with those comments that were made about some of the leaders in different groups and different organizations throughout the community. I think we're seeing a lot of collaboration happening right now, and you're a key cog in that. So thank you for being a part of that.
I think with the exception of March Madness brackets, I'm probably the second biggest contributor to lack of productivity in Council Bluffs today. So
I don't know if I would go that far, Mayor, but we thank you very much again for being with us. We thank our sponsors. We thank everyone for joining us today over the lunch hour. Please do have a nice rest of the day, and thanks again for your support of the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce.
And thanks to all of you for what you do for our community. It's a great place to live and work, and it's only going to get better with the help of all of you. So thank you.
Thanks again, Mayor. We'll see you. Have a nice rest of the day.